So for those who don't know me, I'm Ali Burnham. I'm the creative producer here at WestWords. I'm also a screenwriter by creative trade. So I do love talking shop with other writers as well. So the reason we're all here is this book, Something Blue. And for those, it seems like everyone in this room is quite familiar. But I will read the blurb on the back. 26-year-old Nicole Najim is struggling to find herself after a painful breakup, just when she thought she was going to settle down. Working a dead-end job in the family car dealership at a loose end, she picks up her camera and returns to the melting pot of Sydney's west to rediscover her roots. When she catches up with childhood friend Denny, who makes his living in a shadowy underworld, their relationship intensifies just as the law starts to close in. Nicole must weigh her feelings against her deepest fears, all while chasing down her own dreams and capturing the hidden truths around her. Alex Sarkis writes with warmth, humour and a spot-on eye for the characters and the suburbs of the world she grew up in. This is a novel about loving home, leaving home, but never escaping your roots or your footy colours. How do you feel when you hear someone read your blurb like that?
It's always a bit surreal, but I think it's a really good summation of what's in the book. So, I love the final lines.
Yes.
Yeah, that seems to be the clincher with people,
The end, the footy colours.
Yeah,
then
exactly.
Just immediately you're like, cool, I know what the vibe of this book is.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I just wanted to say it was a pleasure reading Something Blue. Congratulations on the work. For my own experience reading it, and to take kind of the marketing sheen off that blurb, what I enjoyed was a story of Nicole in the throes of a traumatic breakup, which felt quite real, and she's able to rediscover herself through the connections of, with a very delightful and charming secondary cast.
Yeah.
They come across as funny, warm, sometimes startling, and they feel very real. Life manages to kick Nicole while she's down, but what I really enjoy is this quiet arc of her strength that when she goes on to face things that I feel would tear most people apart, we've kind of seen that she has grown and by the end demonstrates an ability to not only survive what is thrown at her at the end, but to have this sense of just optimism. So that's what my little pitch of the book would be.
Very good.
I really enjoyed.
The first time I've heard it worded like that, and you've nailed it. So well
Great.
done.
Before I interrogated you on the subject material, though, I wanted to ask you about yourself.
Okay.
So Something Blue is your debut novel. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And so how long have you been working on the manuscript?
I've been working on it for quite some time. It took me about 4 years to get it all down on paper, which seems quite lengthy, but as well, I had started out writing it as a hobby. It wasn't something that I was doing as work, or definitely in the beginning stages, I didn't really imagine it would get published either. It was just something that was, I had a passion. I've always had a passion for writing, so it was just something that was fun for me to do every few months. I wasn't really consistently working on it, so that's probably why it took as long. Let's hope the next book doesn't take as long. That's how long it took, pretty much. Excellent.
And so you're saying, so you've always done writing more as a passion, but not necessarily something you set out to do, to be a writer?
I mean, I always I loved writing in school, and obviously did, all the English, extension 1, extension 2, whatever, and then I just kept writing because I enjoyed it. It's definitely something you have to have a passion for to do, especially if you're looking to do it as a career as well. If you don't love it, what are you doing,
It doesn't make it easy.
Yeah, exactly. I've never really had formal training in it or anything like that. Like, I don't have a background in, say, journalism or studied it. I did do a workshop once I got this all down.
Yep.
Just to sort of fine tune it and have it be moving in the right direction and just be probably the best story it could be on paper. But outside of that, it was just something I loved to do.
Yeah. And so then how did it find its home with Ultimo? Was there a querying process?
Yes. So I, after this workshop I did, which was actually with the Australian Writers Centre, the lady that ran the course that I was doing, her name's Bernadette, and she advised me to do the ASA pitching program. So basically that's like a speed dating thing on Zoom where you've got to pitch your manuscript to different publishers, and you've got like 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever. You've got to work quickly and you've got to impress them. And some of them have some very intense poker face via Zoom. Like, it's not the most, like it's definitely nerve-wracking to do. So I think I did 2 rounds of that, and I think I've pitched this book at the right time. Like, yes, it's a very good story, but it's something that publishers generally are looking for at the minute as well. So I actually got callbacks from pretty much everybody that I'd pitched to. I'd say everybody.
Yeah.
And then very serious interest from 2 publishers. But I was just very, very keen for it to land at Ultimo because they're obviously a Sydney-based publisher. I knew that they would, more than anyone, see the value of this story. And as well, I liked that they were sort of newish and up and coming, and I'm newish and up and coming. So I knew that we would be like a really good pairing. And I know they've got a wealth of experience there as well. So that was something that was definitely my end goal, and it happened. So it was good. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. And sometimes you just really feel that warmth.
Yes.
With a slightly, well, not necessarily smaller publisher, but a newer publisher, as you described.
They can give you that attention and time that you need, especially as a new writer, because you have no idea what you're doing.
Rather than feeling like you're a cog in the machine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I guess the asterisk there is WestWords has a very good working relationship with Ultimo Press. Not to further endorse them, but yeah. So once it lands at Ultimo Press, what's the editing process like there?
The editing process was very, very intense, but I think good, because there were, even though the story itself was quite good when it landed there, in the sense that it was complete, it didn't really have many plot holes or anything. It wasn't like they read it and axed whole chapters or said, wanted to make major changes, but there was definitely some kinks in there that needed to be ironed out. And so I think there was a few rounds of back and forth, maybe like 2, 3 or 4, I'd say, but 3. Yeah. And it would always be between me and someone new. And overseen by my publisher and my editor. Yes.
So it was fresh eyes every time.
Exactly right. And that's super helpful. I don't think I was really prepared for how intense that editing process would be, but it was definitely necessary. And it was definitely an anxious process, because you're having to read your work with an extremely critical eye every time. So every time you do a round of that, you're just having a mental breakdown because you think the whole thing's crap. But I'm definitely happy with the end product. It just had to happen. It's all part of the process.
Can you think of any examples? Like maybe any plot points they nudged you on, or any character things you were nudged on?
I remember one. One of them was my publisher, Alex Craig, she gave me broad notes to begin with, and one of her notes was that Danny's character needed to be fleshed out a bit more in terms of his family history, his dad, what his dad had been through. That kind of a thing wasn't actually in the original. It was just a very vague story about this dad that had passed away, but we didn't really know that he was as badly injured as he was, or that kind of thing. So that was really helpful. I feel like that really helped, definitely in the final version, of readers being able to sympathise more with Danny, because he's one of those polarising personalities where he kind of makes you question your moral code, because you like him so much, but he's up to no good. And we really wanted to bring that home, and the way to do that was to just talk a bit more about his history in the book.
Yeah. No, because I feel like Danny's an incredibly sympathetic character, and I think a lot of that maybe is that subtle hand of, you do know the circumstances he grew up in, poverty, and the dad especially, and then later reveal with the sister, there's just a whole, there's layers there that are slowly revealed that go into making who Danny is.
Like an onion.
And then he makes you cry.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. For any early career writers in the audience, which we often have at WestWords. Now that you're at the end of this process, is there anything you kind of look back and reflect on and wished maybe you had done differently in the first draft, or things you wished you had known before you dove into the funnel of trade publishing?
I don't know. Is there? I can't really think. Because the process was so long.
Yeah.
Like, I definitely had time to, like, correct everything that I needed to correct. Definitely, you sort of write this book and you try so hard to get it published. You get knocked back a few times, keep going or whatever. But I don't know if anyone's ever had this experience. Maybe I'm just not normal, but I had tried so hard to get it published, and then when I finally did, it's funny because up until that point, it never actually occurred to me that once it's published, how many people would be able to read it. So that was a mental breakdown. Like, I was so excited that I'd gotten this publishing deal, and I probably had like one day of feeling really good about it and then cried for a week because I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to put this out there for everybody to read. So, you know, maybe just in hindsight, I wish I had like maybe mentally prepared for that a bit more. But once you realise that from the point that you get signed to the point that it gets published, you actually have every opportunity in the world to iron out whatever you need to iron out, tweak it, whatever you need to do to make yourself feel more comfortable with the idea that it's going to be, you know, open for public consumption.
Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting thing you've tapped into there that I feel like I can relate to as a writer as well. I did a couple of what are those, like the psychology sessions you can do free through Medicare, the 10 free sessions in the lead up to my movie's premiere as well, because I was kind of fast approaching that. Oh God, like this whole time it's been around all the people who have worked on it, but it was suddenly going to be exposed, and I'm gonna have to go and do talks about it, and just how confronting that was. And having
it's a lot because it's a very insular process when you're writing. It's just you and your laptop. You don't really think much about the audience. I know it's strange to say, but the reality of it doesn't actually hit you until you're like, oh my God, I've got signed.
It's almost you handed over something that has been entirely yours for so long, and then now by definition is going to be
public property. Exactly. Exactly right.
So moving back to the story, so much of it feels authentically representational of Western Sydney Lebanese family. Something which is often thought by Nicole, our narrator. Throughout the book, she thinks about how she would describe Western Sydney to people who aren't from here. And in a way, that's how the book read to me a little bit, that it without sounding too twee about it, it felt like there was moments where I felt invited into this family's home. And I will get it out of the way, that hopefully the whitest thing I'll say tonight is that I feel like I learned a lot reading the book about, because we get to experience their language, cultural customs, religious beliefs. It's all in there. So I did want to ask up front the most obvious question: how much of yourself is in the book? How much of your family has found its way into the book?
So obviously this was a big part of my anxiety in putting it out into the world, because some of it is and a lot of it isn't. But the thing is that the common threads between myself and the main character are quite obvious to anyone that knows me. So my worry was that they were going to read those first few chapters and just be like, brilliant, this girl's written a bio, don't know what the problem is. But I would say that probably from about chapter 4 or 5 onwards, it completely stops being about anything to do with me. And even those first few chapters are, again, like, definitely I wanted it to read and to be as authentic as possible, but it's a cleverly constructed narrative because you need to get the audience on side. Hi guys.
Welcome.
Hi, how are you? Hey. Welcome aboard. So I would say that definitely the main character's immediate family in the book, so her sisters, her parents, is very much based on my sisters and parents.
Great.
But any character beyond that, I can honestly say is completely fictional, especially with characters like Danny. If it was real, I probably wouldn't have been able to write about that particular character. That's a headache that I don't personally want to be signing up for. So that's, that's just an example of it obviously being fiction. So all the major plot points in the book completely made up. Thank God I haven't lost a cousin in a tragic way. That's not happened. The main character is more or less just very much inspired by the many, many, many women around me that have been or are in her situation of life not really panning out the way you thought or in the time frame you thought it would, and just arriving at that crossroads and not really knowing what the hell you're going to do moving forward. That's something that is I think just a very common experience to a lot of women and men as well. I feel like everybody will experience that at some point in their lives, that angst. Even if you're married, you might come to that crossroads of, oh my God, is this how my life's panned out? I don't know, but
No, I love hearing that Danny was completely fictional, because towards the end of the book, we get the sequence where the main character is visiting a jail.
Yeah.
Trying to talk about the book without giving away too many spoilers. But I thought it was, and just the process of Nicole going through all the layers of security, it was a very detailed, a lovely sequence, I thought, where it's just the very benign, mundane rigmarole of having to visit the jail.
Yeah.
So I did quickly pry into how much research, or if you did research into just how you would set up something that...
I mean, look, Danny's not a real character, but I know people that have gone through that experience, and actually that entire chapter was written off the back of my best friend having to go and visit one of her partners at some point down at Goulburn. So I just called her up and said, mate, you need to walk me through every security checkpoint that you went through so that I know what to put down. And she's had to read that chapter a few times to just greenlight what I put in there.
Well, that's how it felt, like someone who's
you definitely want it to be authentic, because your worst case scenario is that someone that's actually been down to Goulburn or actually visited jail is going to read this and be like, this is not what happens. What is this girl talking about? So you definitely need to dot your I's and cross your T's on things like that. But just in terms of that line of questioning in general, I would say the whole book is a very, very big patchwork of stories and characters and scenarios that I've accumulated over a lifetime of living in Sydney. And every character, like I said, outside of that family unit, that close family unit, is completely fictional, but is also, I've borrowed traits here and there. They're like a mashup of 3 or 4 different people I know, and that's what writers do. You want these characters to ring true, you want them to have authentic traits, so you have to take from people around you, but you then pull all these threads and construct these characters that are completely standalone.
I had a writing teacher once that described it as, but putting them in different clothes.
Yes.
So kind of you're borrowing from this, but you just want to change it up enough that it's no longer recognizable as the thing you've drew inspiration from and made it your own.
Exactly.
So as a writer, especially at the moment where there's a large emphasis in publishing on own voices, I do think a lot of writers and their relationship with their work, so every writer's different about how distantly they hold themselves from the work. For example, there are writers out there who intentionally set out to write from their own experiences and want to tell, look, this is the truth of the situation. And then other writers who will happily accept that, look, subconsciously I'm going to put my own views and thoughts into my work, but it's not necessarily what I'm setting out to do. So I wanted to ask where you felt you landed kind of on that spectrum between intentionally, look, this is the kind of story I want to set out and make these points, or if it was a more organic and less intentional journey for you with this story.
I think it's a bit of both. I think most stories are a bit of both. With Nicole's character, I mean, as much as I have common threads with her, she as well was carefully constructed in the sense that I needed a main character that had her foot on either side of the fence. So I needed somebody that, if you're from the West and you're born and raised in the West, you still feel like she's your mate, she's relatable, she knows the things that you know. But also, if you've never been to the West, if you're not Lebanese, because she sort of lives on the periphery of the West and has a relatable voice and is going through things that are universal, love, loss, whatever, you as well can relate to her and think she's your friend, and you feel safe with her when she's going around to the West, like to different places in the West or whatever. You feel like you have an ally in her. You're kind of like the fly on her shoulder that is going around to these places with her. So she needed to be that kind of a character that had that broad appeal. So in terms of things like that, that was things that I thought out.
That was very intentional from the start.
Yeah, it needed to be planned out like that so that she could connect with as many people as possible that picked it up.
Yeah. Beautiful. And so this story is set in 2017, and there is a moment in the story, as Nicole described it, she experiences what it's like to be cancelled, where she posts a photo about the marriage plebiscite on her Instagram, and how the reality was Western Sydney voted largely no.
Yeah.
And I thought the book did a really good job of presenting the reality, a glimpse into the cultural and religious thinking behind a percentage stat like that.
Yeah.
And in fact, I'd say it's a reoccurring theme of the book, that it goes out of its way to showcase the faces and the names and personalities behind the statistics, both with Shadi and with Denny.
Yeah.
I think that word is used a couple of times, like they're not just statistics. Here are the characters. So I wanted to ask what inspired you to go against the grain there, and because this does feel like a point of difference for this book, that it wants to take a look at these themes from a different perspective and not necessarily in the same kind of glossy, progressive take we're used to.
One of my main aims when I was writing this book was just I never wanted to set out to for it to be like a vessel of political commentary. I feel like there's enough of that in the world, and when somebody picks up a book like my book, they just want to be entertained, really, at the end of the day. It just has to be a good story, and that was always my number one priority in writing this. Obviously, you feed certain threads throughout your story that are interesting and relevant, but if that's not wrapped in something that's very entertaining, no one wants to listen to you. That's the bottom line. And I feel like there's a lot of fiction at the minute where it would have been a really good story were it not forcing an agenda down someone's throat, and that's not to say that stories and fiction aren't a great way to get those points across and to open people's eyes to certain social issues or whatever. But if that's the main thing that you're trying to do, you get a few pages in, you feel like it's not connecting with you, you feel like you're being lectured. Yeah. You'll put it down and you won't pick it up again. So definitely with this book, I sort of latched onto the marriage equality vote survey or vote that was happening at that time, because the main reason really was I needed something that was going to show the difference between the West and the rest of Sydney. And obviously that's broadly speaking. There are many people out West that support gay marriage, but I'm talking about like the majority of that area, what their opinions are, where they fall on that issue, and how that compares to the rest of Sydney. Like, for example, if I was writing a book that was set in 2021, I would definitely use the COVID laws and the difference between how the West was treated and compared to the rest. That would have been my tool then to use to show that, this really big part of Sydney that's probably the most populated area of Sydney, or it's just a good reach in terms of making that point. So that's why I fed that in.
Yeah.
And also definitely to sort of touch on the fact that like with Ellie's character and things like that, that was a way to highlight that and to bring that in.
Yeah.
The sort of humanity of that situation as well.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Ellie's one of my favourite characters. so I thought it was handled, really well. And I'm just reflecting on, again, I love writing as something that asks questions but doesn't necessarily set out to provide the answers. It's just there to create that conversation.
Yeah.
And I thought this book does it really well. Nicole does exist in a time and place where there always seems to be clashing cultures. So whether that is between what is defined as her and her family and true Aussies, in quotation marks, the religious versus the LGBT rights. And also, I kind of loved the idea that Nicole would self-define as a feminist, but not all the time, as well. And that it also came back to this. Well, for me, I was reading into it as what was always present was the intergenerational culture clash that Nicole was always on the edge of. She's a character who's brutally aware of her privilege compared to her parents and where her grandparents came from. And she exists on the edge of that contradiction and is defined by it, but isn't necessarily out to solve that. Which I thought was a refreshing change from other books. So again, I just wanted to ask you to speak to that, it sounds like it was something you did semi-intentionally, but also at the same time, you were more just concerned with writing a good story, but whether or not it was telling that story of a character who exists in contradiction, but that's not the thing she needs to solve about herself.
Well, I mean, I think the easiest answer to that is that's just the reality of the situation for many young ethnic people. And again, I wasn't out to make political statements about anything. It was more just I wanted to hold a mirror up to what it's actually like to be young Lebanese and to grow up sort of between different cultures and different ideologies and have love and respect for all of the above, you know, and just to try to find your footing. Again, I feel just a very common experience for everybody that's ethnic. So in terms of that, the only motive to include that was that it's authentic, it's real, it's the case. You know what I mean?
And that's how it reads. And I've got more on Ellie here because again I thought Ellie was a great character, and how so many of the arcs, and Ellie represents this for me, that they're not like fully resolved. They're not a neat little bow in that. So we get the scene where Ellie's crying at the end, and for me I thought that was a beautiful moment and was satisfying enough as a reader that that's a moment of him expressing feelings that he's otherwise been denying. And then going back to Nicole, her arcs, while they're not resolved, quotation marks, either, but you still feel satisfied and you have this optimistic feeling as the ending. And what I thought you've managed to do is capture a very real millennial story, in that sense of that incompleteness in our own arcs that we might be feeling, and that we are a generation who's constantly reminded of our privilege and the perpetual fear that if we're failing if we don't constantly feel happy all the time. I thought that was quite a universal feeling of our generation, even without the layers of cultural pressure that you've mentioned as the feeling of the ethnic reality. I'm leading to a question here. Okay. This is me just talking about these are all the things I really enjoyed about the book. So you managed to tie that off though with a comforting feeling at the end of your story. So I wanted to ask if, again, that was intentional for you, being look, I'm going to address these anxieties, these pressures, but still trying to tell us, achieving a story that is about kind of comforting, because that's how I felt away at the reader at the end, is kind of being great, this feeling is universal. If this character can find optimism and comfort at the end of all that, then surely I can too.
Yeah.
As a warm feeling.
Yeah.
For your story.
That was definitely intentional. When I first started writing this book, I absolutely knew I didn't want her to have a neat ending, to find a husband and get married, because the whole point of this character is to speak to people that are unsure about their life or where it's headed, and I didn't want to alienate that audience by the end of it by having her skip off into the sunset. It was not that kind of story. But I did want them, like you said, to feel hopeful and feel like she's going to come out of it okay, and that she's got a whole life ahead of her, and that, you know, it's funny, a lot of DMs I get are, is there going to be a sequel? I need more Nicole and Danny. And I'm happy that I left readers with that hope that maybe not, you know. So all of that was very intentional, and like you said, I just wanted her to stay true to the crux of the novel, which is that we're all trying to figure out life. You know, it's not over till it's over, and you just got to keep pushing. Yeah. No, I feel like a sequel would almost undo the wonderful point you've landed on, which is that incompleteness, that you don't know what the future's going to hold. And there was that wonderful quiet tragedy in that Danny and Nicole never quite get their moment in time together. I wouldn't want that answered for me. Oh my God, okay. Yeah, fair enough. I think that's kind of brilliant, leaving that off where you have. So also on the back of that, I really enjoyed the nuanced depiction of mental health in the story, especially kind of the first half of the story. And even the title, Something Blue, I think is a wonderful kind of double meaning title you've achieved, because at the start you think it's about all the wedding themes and all the wedding talk. But for me, what resonated was when it's revealed to be just a tool she uses to cope with anxiety. So we get that wonderful scene of just focus on the sensory things around you, find something blue, count the things blue around you. So that's... Now when I look at the cover, that's what I think of more than all the wedding stuff. It's... And as you said, you didn't want this to be kind of a preachy book. Preachy was my word, but you didn't want this to be a preachy book and use kind of those labels, because the characters sound like they don't want to use those labels. And that distancing, for me made it feel more real. I'm leading towards a question you have answered for us, but was introducing kind of those anxiety coping techniques and things like that something, again, was important for you to weave into your entertaining story that you set out to write? I don't know, I feel like mental health is such a widespread issue, especially nowadays, and maybe it was as well before, but no one really talked about it that much or knew what the hell they were going through. Now we've diagnosed everything left, right and centre. So it was something that I wanted to put in the book because, again, it's widespread, and that's definitely what the title is about, although it's about a few things. It's about that, and there's a lot of blue throughout the book, with bulldogs, with her cousin's car, with things like that. There's a lot of blue imagery, very significant things around that. I definitely had a bit of anxiety to call it Something Blue, because I didn't want people to pick it up and just think it was a rom-com about a wedding. So I was like, God help me, the cover needs to sort of offset that a little bit. But I've actually forgotten your question, because now I'm on a tangent.
It wasn't a very good question anyway. But I did.
Did I put the anxiety thing in on purpose? Yeah. Yes, I did. Because I just feel like it's very widespread, and, you know, a lot of people would be able to relate to that, especially after a breakup or something where a serious breakup where you feel like you're going to marry this person, your life's headed in a certain direction, and then the sort of, what's that saying, the rug gets pulled out from underneath you. That is a real trigger for a spiral, I'll tell you that much. So
I do love how it's such a Trojan horse title, because even just the Something Blue, I think, is speaking to that kind of the depression state the Nicole starts in at the start. It is a melancholy reflection on life at the start, and you are contrasting that with all the wonderful wedding tropes that are happening simultaneously. I think that's a lovely balance you've struck there. And I do want to talk about the humour in the story. I was saving this for last, but I adore the humour in the book. I've focused in on all the heavy kind of subject material at the start, but I think almost it leads with its front foot with its humour. And also, so what I would describe as Western Sydney stereotypes, but stereotypes handled with such love, and like, this struck me as a book that wanted to poke fun of at itself a little bit, but done so in the most kind of loving and caring way. The way the characters talk, their insults, the footy, the wedding tropes, the wog weddings, as it keeps getting described as. So I just wanted to ask, was that your intention, capturing that feeling and like presenting those stereotypes again to people who might not, that's maybe what they think of when they think Western Sydney, but then giving the holistic view of it?
All right, I'm going to answer this question in two parts. So in terms of the humour, that was obviously very intentional, but as well, it kind of writes itself. When you live here long enough, just the comments and the craziness that you hear and see around you, it's not like you have to sit there and really construct dialogue. It's happening around you all the time. That's the way, not everybody, I've always got to be careful not to generalise too much, but people that I know that I'm around from the West, that's how they talk, that's how they interact, they swear a lot. They're always making fun of themselves and other people, or just the things they say are so like contradictory to how they present that it's just so funny. But I think because there's so much heavy material in the book, I needed that to balance it out, especially with Nicole's sort of mood in the beginning and whatever. You want her to be sad enough that someone sad will be able to relate to her, but you also don't want the reader to have to suffer through 300 pages of her being miserable, So definitely throughout the majority of the book, she's sort of struggling with this breakup and this crossroads she's at or whatever. But I needed to, again, offset that against a really interesting cast of characters around her that are so funny, that are so vibrant, and have her have these like crazy sort of experiences that keep, like this first date or this night from hell out in the cross or whatever it may be, just to keep the reader interested and on board with her. So that was part of the reason I used the humour, was because it just is what it is. That's how people talk and speak, and I find people from Western Sydney so funny. And the other part of it was, I needed that to keep the story going. In terms of the stereotypes that I used, I mean, like I've said, outside of my main aim being just to tell a good story and have people fall in love with the characters and like the characters and be able to relate, I think probably one of the little agendas that I actually had in telling this story was not to shy away from those stereotypes, to include them but make them very layered. Like Danny, like Dave. So on your first impressions of them, you think, well, this is typical obnoxious builder, and this is Lebo, potentially drug dealer, criminal from Greenacre. But the more that you read the book, the more you realize, you start to sympathise with them and really like them, and find them to be very endearing. And Danny is a character that if you had just seen the news report about him on the news, you wouldn't have thought much of him. Like, oh yeah, typical, whatever, and kept living your life. But I kind of wanted to give that window with this book behind what actually makes a man like that, what he might have been through, what kind of person he is toward his family. The fact that he's, a man of faith is something that people would typically feel is at a contradiction to what he does for work, generally speaking. So that was an aim of mine. That was something that I wanted to do, and I personally love a stereotype. That's just because something's a stereotype doesn't mean it's not true, but it just means that it's probably just a little bit of a two-dimensional view on a much bigger story. So I wanted to play around with that for sure.
And I think what gives the characters so much life is they're aware of their own stereotypes.
Yeah.
And their relationship with leaning either into the stereotypes they're aware of or when they choose to break from it.
Yeah.
It feels very intentional. You're watching just the wider cast acknowledge those tropes and be like, oh yeah, that's how it is, or no, don't put that on me, and so that's fun. Just always kind of watching.
I feel
happen.
Layla's very good at that. Layla loves to be a stereotype until it doesn't work for her anymore.
And that again feels very real. I wanted to talk more about your dialogue and how much I adore it. So my background in screenplays, like I'm reading it and can already see like what an amazing script it would make.
Brilliant, love that. That's what we're manifesting, everybody.
Yeah.
So,
I almost wanted you've answered this in that it just sounds like you've just been osmosed in this kind of dialogue your whole life, that it sounds very easy that you just sat down and wrote it. But for me, I'm imagining, I'm like, man, were you sitting down with a recorder and just like spying on your family and capturing dialogue? Because at times there were just so many witty punchlines that landed so well. I actually wrote down like 2 that I genuinely laughed out loud at.
Okay.
So it's when she's with Shadi and getting photographs, and they're just trying to work out what can we take pictures of, and there's the guy selling mandarins, and she's like, why would I take a picture of that? And he's like, oh, but it's a good deal.
Yeah.
So I lost it at that. I love that. And the other one was a joke right at the start with the wedding, and they're commenting on the low chandeliers, and they're like, oh, another inch there, and she could have sued. I thought that was brilliant. So no, that was just me giving you a personal compliment.
Love that.
Good dialogue. And finally, I just kind of wanted to end with, I thought a writing technique you used really well was not including the name of Judas until his one and only scene in the whole book.
Yeah.
And he, because of this choice, was such a powerful off-screen character, but at the same time was a character that wasn't worth the time of day, so wasn't going to be given the time of day in Nicole's thoughts and in the narrative. And again, I felt that was another choice you've made that went against the grain of typical rom-coms. So I wanted to ask if that was an intentional decision during the writing from an early draft.
90% is an intentional decision.
Yeah.
That was intentional because it was more just to sort of build him up as a real sort of almost omnipresent villain in her life, like Voldemort, the name that cannot be spoken, or whatever I don't know, I've obviously quoted that wrong, but something along the lines of that, someone that is has just been so detrimental to her that you almost can't say his name, because that's how much of a trigger it is for this particular character. So that was definitely intentional. And then I had to figure out what to call him, because you can't just run with X for the whole thing. It's a little bit boring. So he got Judas. That was his name. And it's funny because even one of my cousins messaged to me, and she said it's funny that when his name is actually revealed, it's Adam, which is she picked up on. I'm not sure if anybody else would, but that's significant in the sense that she kind of worded it like. The original sin, like this guy that the guy that her first love, and this guy that has come and just really screwed her over, so... No,
the biblical connotations landed for me straight away with that reveal,
Yeah. So, yes, all intentional.
No, it was
Sorry, wasn't it that Eve actually gave the apple to Adam and maybe it's the wrong bottle of thing.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Eve, I think, played a little bit of a part there. Maybe it was just very, very hungry. We don't know.
But him as the first man, and just how you've had all the other religious stuff that is just, always on the edge of adding pressure to what Nicole is trying to navigate. That was just the final, well, of course his name is Adam, moment of reveal. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Not to put you on the spot, but was there a passage that you would
There was. I feel like we've settled on one. I'm not very good at reading my own books, so I'm going to be very honest with the room, but I will read. This is actually my first reading that I've ever done, you guys, so it's all happening. We're all in it together. Definitely don't video it because could be a disaster area. Yeah, I've already reached for the phones and I was like, absolutely not. Yeah. Okay, where was it? Was it chapter 15, Kat? I think so. I've chosen one with the problem with reading this aloud is that there's like 55 accents a chapter and I'm not very good at doing all the accents in the world, so I've chosen this.
I must say the audiobook reader is amazing. How
good. Yeah, I know. I actually haven't properly listened to the audio yet. I need to do that, but I've listened to samples of it and she was amazing, so that was really good. So just to let you know how much I'm going to read, just so you don't feel like you're in for a never-ending reading, it's this page and then this little bit here. So bear with me. Okay, chapter 15. The day of Yasmin's media launch, I ready myself with an early morning blow dry and a sheet mask from Sephora that makes me feel like I'm suffocating inside a plastic bag. It's a Thursday, which means it's my second consecutive day off work this week. Well, sort of. Yesterday, I'd planned to go exploring with my camera, but a thunderstorm hit Sydney, the way they only do in Australia, where the sky goes green and the lightning cracks and the heat from the bitumen sizzles like a sausage at the first drops of rain. I took some photos of the storm from our porch, but then, as my dad had predicted, I found myself trapped at home with nothing to do. My mother suggested that the two of us should rearrange the pantry, starting with the spices, and so I ran to my car in the pouring rain and drove my ass to work. It was hardly the start that I'd wanted, but today I'm hoping will be different. Yasmin has assured me that her fashion show will go ahead, rain, hail or shine. There's only one problem, and it glints at me from my wardrobe door hung high on a black velvet hanger. I sit on my bed in a pair of nude, seamless underwear, the only type of knickers suitable for a dress as minimal as this. Yasmin had it delivered this morning along with the promise of a hire car to pick up me and Ellie at precisely 6 p.m. Nicole! My mother yells from the stairs. Ellie's here. Fuck. I walk over to the wardrobe and stare at the black embossed swing tag pinned to the dress's inner label. Yasmin Ali. God, I lament there's always a catch. The dress feels heavy in my hands. I hold it against myself, appraising its thigh-high split. The material, though sheer, is embellished with thousands of gold beads that seem to converge around the peaks and valleys of my privates. When I finally pull it on, it clings to my body like a desperate lover. My breasts sit like two half-moons, accentuated by the plunging neckline that almost reaches my navel. Objectively speaking, it's a beautiful dress, but it belongs on someone else, a Hollywood starlet or a coal-eyed Egyptian queen. Mum and Ellie are waiting for me, swapping pleasantries in the hall. In a last feeble attempt at modesty, I part my hair and push it forward to cover my cleavage. Then I come around the banister and slowly step into view. Ellie ceases fake laughing and gapes at me from the bottom of the stairs. Babe. I look from him to my mother, who seems equally stunned. What a fucking dress. My mother says nothing. I planned on getting past her by acting as cool as possible. She's never liked her daughters leaving the house half naked, and so I figured my only hope was to feign an air of self-confidence. But, like most predatory beasts, my mum can smell fear. She quickly regains her composure, casting a critical eye from the crown of my head to my gold strappy heels. Then she says, "Why have you got your hair like that?" I stall beneath her narrowed gaze. Like what? Like how it is. She points at me with an open palm. Push it back. I sweep my hair behind my shoulders, revealing the full extent of the plunging neckline. Amazing, Ellie breathes. And to my surprise, my mother agrees. Much better, she says. You can't